The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and tired hope. Naomi Callahan sat in the blue vinyl chair closest to the window, her hands folded over the curve of her stomach, watching December light fall thin and pale across the courtyard of Toronto General Hospital. 8 months along, and Trevor hadn't come to a single appointment since July. She had stopped leaving him the dates on the kitchen whiteboard after October. He hadn't noticed. She was rereading the same paragraph of a parenting magazine for the third time when the automatic doors slid open, and Krista Donnelly walked in. Naomi felt her before she saw her, that particular kind of stillness that falls over a room when something is wrong. Heads turning, a child going quiet on its mother's lap, the receptionist's eyes flicking up from her screen. Krista Donnelly moved through the waiting room like she owned the square footage, her camel coat unbuttoned despite the December cold outside, her dark hair pulled back in the kind of effortless knot that takes 45 minutes to achieve. She was Trevor Landon's communications director. That was the title. That was what his assistant had told Naomi 7 months ago, when Naomi had found the dinner reservation in his jacket pocket. A table for two at Canoe, a Thursday night, and the name on the booking wasn't his. Naomi. Krista said her name softly, like something private, like they were friends who shared secrets. They were not friends. You shouldn't be here. Naomi kept her voice level, her hands pressed flat against the sides of her stomach. Whatever this is, not here. Krista took another step forward, close enough that Naomi could smell her perfume, something sharp and expensive. He's not coming, Krista said. Not today, not to the next one, not to the birth. I thought someone should tell you, since he doesn't have the nerve. I know. Naomi's voice was quieter than she intended. I've known for a long time. Something shifted in Krista's expression. Not softness, nothing so human as that. More like irritation that the conversation wasn't landing where she'd aimed it. Then you know it's finished. She tilted her head. The lawyers have the paperwork. You'd be doing yourself a favor by letting it go cleanly. Naomi looked at her. The waiting room had gone very still. Even the child on its mother's lap had stopped moving. I'd like you to leave, Naomi said. What happened next took less than 3 seconds. Krista's hand came forward. Not a full swing, nothing so obvious, just a hard shove to Naomi's shoulder, calculated and sudden, the kind of push that could be reframed as a stumble, an accident, a misunderstanding. But Naomi was 8 months pregnant, her center of gravity already impossible, and the force sent her sideways into the metal armrest of the chair, with a sound that rang out across the linoleum. She heard herself gasp. She heard someone at the desk shout. She felt a cramping pull low in her abdomen that turned everything white. And then the nurses were there, and someone was saying her name. And the world narrowed to the steady sound of a monitor being wheeled toward her and a voice saying, "The baby's all right, the baby's all right. We're going to take care of you." Krista was already gone. But she'd left something behind. A ring, a thick band of gold set with a single emerald, caught under the lip of the baseboard heater where it had slid when she fled. The security guard on duty picked it up without thinking and dropped it into an evidence bag. 12 minutes earlier, across the city in a glass-walled conference room on Bay Street, Trevor Landon had been laughing. Naomi would picture it later, the way she imagined it at least. Trevor in his chair, his jacket on the back of it, that particular looseness he got when the meeting was going well, and he knew it. His phone face down on the table. The calls from the hospital coming in, one after another, the screen lighting up silently, pressed against the wood. He'd missed 3 by the time his assistant stepped in and handed him a note. He read it, looked up, looked back down, and told his assistant to hold his messages. Moira Callahan arrived at Toronto General 47 minutes after the call reached her. Still in the dark wool blazer she wore for mornings when she had court-adjacent obligations. Retired from the Superior Court of Ontario for 3 years now, but old habits of dress didn't soften easily. She was 61 years old, and she moved like someone who had spent decades in rooms where every word was weighed. What she saw through the observation window stopped her in the corridor. Naomi was lying back against the elevated bed, one hand resting on her stomach, her face turned toward the window. There were monitors, there were tubes, there was a bruise already forming along her forearm where she'd caught herself on the armrest. Naomi's eyes were closed, but she wasn't sleeping. Moira had raised that girl. She knew the difference. Moira stood there for a long moment, looking at her daughter through the glass. She was not a woman given to visible grief. But standing in that hospital corridor in December, watching Naomi lie still and alone in that bed, something in Moira's chest shifted. Old guilt, older love, and her jaw set in a way that people who knew her had learned to treat as a warning. She'd urged Naomi not to marry Trevor Landon. She'd said it plainly once, 2 weeks before the wedding. A man who wants to build a life of his own, but starts by borrowing someone else's name and connections, will only resent the debt. Naomi hadn't listened. She was 31 and in love, and certain she understood something her mother didn't. Moira hadn't pushed it. She'd shown up to the wedding, made the toast, and kept her opinions to herself. She was done keeping things to herself. She turned to the young man beside her, Felix Grayson, who had clerked for her 6 years ago and was now a senior partner at Thorvald and Associates, and who had driven her here in 20 minutes because he too knew Moira's expression. "I need everything," she said. "The hospital security footage from this morning. The identity of the woman who walked in. Her connection to Trevor Landon, documented. Whatever she's touched financially, professionally, publicly. And I need to know where he was when the hospital called." Felix nodded. He was already typing. The nurses mentioned a piece of jewelry left behind. "Get it logged properly." Moira paused. "And don't let anyone speak to the press until I say so." She pushed open the door to Naomi's room. Trevor arrived at 2:15 in the afternoon. When the worst of the panic had settled into the quiet hum of monitoring equipment, and Naomi was sitting up, sipping tea that had gone cold. He wore his coat still buttoned, like he might leave again quickly. His eyes moved around the room, the machines, the IV line, the empty chair where a husband should have been hours ago, without settling on any of it. Moira was standing near the window. He hadn't expected her. The slight widening of his eyes said so. "Trevor," Moira said, not a greeting, a notation. He recovered quickly, he always did. "I came as soon as I heard. There was a situation at the office." "You heard at 11:43, Moira said. "It's now past 2. She didn't raise her voice. She never needed to. "And the woman who put my daughter on a hospital gurney is your communications director." Trevor's composure flickered. "I don't know what Krista was doing here. I didn't know she was coming." "That may be true," Moira said, "but I've already seen the footage." She turned toward Felix, who set a tablet on the tray table. The security camera recording was clear. Krista's approach, the conversation, the shove, the catch of the ring on Naomi's armrest, the rapid exit through the side stairwell. "The RCMP's Financial Crime Unit has an interest in irregular fund flows from Landon Communications," Felix added, from the corner, conversationally. "Specifically, a retainer being paid to a media consulting firm registered in Krista Donnelly's name as of 8 months ago, before Miss Donnelly was officially listed as a contractor." Trevor looked at him, then at Moira. "That's a business arrangement." "With your mistress," Naomi said. It was the first thing she'd said since he walked in. Her voice was quiet and very steady. "Just say what it is, Trevor. I'm tired." He opened his mouth. "Don't," she said. "Not in this room." He left 20 minutes later. The chair by Naomi's bed remained empty until Moira pulled it over and sat down. Within 48 hours, Krista Donnelly's media strategy came online. It was methodical and immediately recognizable to anyone who had watched a reputation campaign unfold in public. A cluster of social media accounts, none older than 3 months, began posting variations on the same theme: a troubled woman, an attention-seeking wife, a staged incident. Screenshots of texts with context stripped away. A thread claiming hospital staff had confirmed no significant injury. One account used a photo of Naomi, taken outside a restaurant in the Distillery District, 6 months pregnant, laughing at something off camera. The caption described it as proof of her instability. Naomi read it in her hospital bed at 7 in the morning and felt something cold settle over her. Felix found her reading it when he came in with Moira's files. He took the phone from her hand gently. "Don't. They're calling me a liar," she said. "I know." He set the phone face down. "And we're tracing every account back to its funding source. The IP signatures are sloppy. Whoever set this up was confident enough not to be careful. Moira was in her element. In 30 years on the bench, and before that 20 years as counsel, she had watched powerful people believe their own invulnerability, right up until the moment the evidence was entered into the record. She was done watching. Now she was building the record herself. Her legal team filed a motion for emergency asset review on Krista Donnelly's consulting firm. Her communications contact, a woman who had handled crises for 3 premiers and didn't frighten easily, issued a precisely worded response to every outlet that ran the smear material. And then Moira did the thing that Trevor and Krista had not accounted for. She went to the Law Society Foundation Gala. It was held on the second Friday of December, every year at the Fairmont Royal York. Black tie, 600 guests, half the judiciary, a third of Bay Street's senior partners, the mayor, 2 cabinet ministers, and every journalist in the city who covered law and money. Moira had not attended in 4 years. Her absence this year would have been entirely expected. She arrived at 8:15 in a charcoal evening gown and took her place at the table near the dais that her name had been on the seating chart for 3 decades. Felix sat beside her. Krista Donnelly arrived at 8:40, flanked by a publicist and wearing the kind of confidence that comes from believing you've already won. She had been told, by someone she trusted, that Moira Callahan would not be there. She was wrong on both counts. The dinner proceeded normally. The speeches proceeded normally. And then, during the interval before dessert, the projection screen at the front of the room, ordinarily used for the Foundation's annual impact slides, changed. The security footage from Toronto General played in full, 12 seconds, clear and authenticated, with a timestamp verified by the hospital's own legal office. Krista approaching. The shove, the fall, Naomi's hands going to her stomach. The room went absolutely silent. Moira stood. She had spent 30 years making rooms listen to her without a microphone. 3 days ago, she said clearly, into that silence. My daughter was 8 months pregnant and sitting in a hospital waiting room. She was shoved to the ground by the woman in that footage. My grandchild is safe. My daughter is recovering. And I am here tonight because silence has never protected anyone I love. She let that sit for a moment. The footage has been certified by 3 independent sources and submitted in full to Toronto Police Services. The ring Ms. Donnelly left behind at the scene has been entered into evidence. What happens in the courts from here is the law's business. What happens in this room from here is yours. Krista was on her feet. Her publicist had already stepped back. That footage is manipulated. Her voice was too loud for the room, too uneven. This family has the resources to fabricate anything. Miss Donnelly, a woman at the table nearest the dais, the Chief Justice of Ontario, who had clerked under Moira's mentor 30 years prior, spoke without looking up from her water glass. Sit down. Krista sat. The cameras in the room had been running since the footage began. Naomi watched it streamed live on Felix's laptop from her hospital room, with her knees pulled up as far as they could go and her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had actually stayed warm this time. She didn't feel triumph. She'd expected to, and it surprised her that she didn't. What she felt was something quieter, like a room airing out after too long with the windows shut. She called Trevor that night. He picked up on the second ring, which meant he'd been waiting. I know you've seen it, she said. Naomi, don't apologize. I don't want an apology. She looked at the dark window, the city lights smeared wet with winter. I want you to understand that none of what you told yourself, none of it was true. You didn't build anything from nothing. You built it from the introductions I made, and the people my mother knew, and the reputation I let you borrow. And the moment you thought you didn't need to borrow anymore, you stopped seeing me at all. Silence on the line. I'm not saying that to hurt you, she continued. I'm saying it because you're going to spend the next several years figuring out who you are without those things, and I think you need to start from an honest place. I loved you, he said. His voice cracked on it. I know you did, she said. That's the part that's sad. She hung up. Then she put her hand flat against her stomach and felt the soft pressure of a heel, or a fist, she could never quite tell, pushing back against her palm. "We're all right," she said to the room, to herself, to the child who would arrive in 6 weeks, and would be improbably the uncomplicated good thing to come out of all of this. Krista Donnelly was charged with criminal harassment and assault causing bodily harm. Her trial took 4 months. She was convicted on both counts and received 18 months, with conditions. The consulting firm was dissolved. The social media accounts were traced to servers she'd paid for directly, a piece of digital carelessness that Felix had identified within the first 48 hours. Trevor did not face criminal charges. He faced something he found, in some ways, harder: Moira's lawyers, the separation agreement, and the slow unraveling of every professional relationship he had built through a family whose name he no longer had access to. Within 8 months, Landon Communications had been rebranded under new ownership, and Trevor had accepted a position in Calgary, far enough away to start the story over with an audience that didn't know the old one. Naomi signed the divorce papers on a Thursday afternoon in March, sitting at the kitchen table of the Rosedale house she'd grown up visiting. Her mother's house, which Moira had offered without conditions, and Naomi had accepted without argument. She signed them and then made coffee and sat in the window that looked out over the back garden, where the snow was just beginning to recede in the corners where the sun hit. She felt, she would say later to Moira, like a window left open on the first real day of spring. Not fixed, not repaired, just aired out, breathable again. Her son was born on a Saturday in February, in the same hospital where the story had nearly broken her. He arrived loud and furious about it, and the nurses said he had his grandmother's expression, which made Moira laugh in the corridor for the first time in months. Naomi named him James. It was her grandfather's name. A man who had believed inflexibly that the most important thing a person could do was show up for the people who needed them. She thought it was a good name to grow into. 3 weeks after the birth, Moira announced the establishment of the Callahan Maternal Safety Initiative, a fund to expand security protocols and patient advocacy services at obstetric units across Ontario. The inaugural donation came from the damages awarded in the civil suit. Several hospitals called the week it launched. Naomi read the coverage from the armchair in the nursery, James asleep against her chest, breathing the slow, even breath of someone who has no idea yet how complicated the world is. She received one more message she couldn't fully account for, the evening the civil judgment was finalized. A photograph, taken from inside the Law Society gala, of Krista Donnelly's face in the exact moment the footage had begun to play on the screen. Below it, 3 words: she wasn't alone. Naomi forwarded it to Felix, who forwarded it to the detective on the case, who said they'd look into it. And they did. By the following month, 2 additional individuals connected to the smear campaign had been identified and referred for prosecution. The message, it turned out, had come from a former employee of Krista's firm, a young woman who had been pressured into running the fake accounts and decided finally that she was done carrying someone else's guilt. She met with Moira's legal team. She told them everything. There were no shadows left unexamined, no threads deliberately left hanging. Naomi set the phone down, looked at the ceiling of the nursery, and made a decision. Tonight was James, and the lamp on low, and the sound of the city outside doing its ordinary city things without her needing to fix any of it. Outside, the Toronto skyline held its lights against the dark the way it always did, steady and indifferent, and, if you looked at it long enough, something almost like reassuring. She'd survived the worst chapter. She intended to write the rest herself.